In an apparent effort to cause yet another false flag, undercover FBI provocateurs tried to convince then 27-year-old Schaeffer Cox to do a mass shooting in his home of Fairbanks, Alaska. Schaeffer Cox, a well-known Second Amendment lobbyist who had won 38% of the vote in a state house selection, became the subject of an intense FBI investigation after he angered state and federal authorities by openly accusing them of drug trafficking and child prostitution. Oil pipeline service company executive Bill Allen, who had been spared prosecution on multiple counts of sexual abuse of minors in exchange for his 2008 testimony against pro-Second Amendment Alaska Senator Ted Stevens, was among those implicated. The statewide drug task force supplied children for sex to a number of state and federal officials in exchange for those officials' cooperation in concealing the ongoing illicit drug trafficking activities of the statewide drug task force, Schaeffer Cox said. Not long after these public statements, the same departments that Schaeffer Cox accused of corruption sent in numerous provocateurs to try to switch his efforts off of exposing corruption and onto violent vigilante-type actions. Schaeffer Cox, who believes in non-aggression and voluntarism, can be heard on multiple undercover recordings telling the provocateurs, "No, I'm going to pull a Gandhi, not a Rambo, and if we turn violent, people will see us as the bad guys." In what some have called a deviation from accepted investigative techniques, the FBI responded to Schaeffer Cox's rejection of their violent proposals by creating a threat to his children that could serve as a motivator. Working with the Office of Child Services, the FBI filed a child neglect complaint regarding Schaeffer and his wife Marty's 1.5-year-old son. Because they do not require probable cause, child neglect complaints are an attractive tool for investigators who wish to enter a home but lack any evidence to support a warrant. Once Schaeffer Cox was made aware of the writ of assistance issued for the seize of his young son, the FBI dispatched undercover provocateur Bill Fulton tried again to convince Schaeffer Cox to go on a shooting spree in response to these new developments. Bill Fulton, acting under the supervision of FBI Special Agent Sandra Klein, pointed out that the child neglect was obviously the corrupt work of Schaeffer Cox's political adversaries in the government and urged him to kill all officials involved. When Schaeffer Cox and his friend Les Zerbe refused Fulton's violent suggestions a second time, Fulton flew into a rage. He held a hunting knife to Zerbe's throat and told him he would slit his throat open and bleed him out at his feet if he and Cox didn't agree to the proposed mass shooting. Cox and Zerbe refused and escaped, never to see Fulton again. Suspecting foul play by the FBI and local police and fearing for their lives from Fulton, Schaeffer Cox and his wife went to the military police station on Fort Wainwright for help. Officers there advised Cox that federal agents had come into the station and bragged of how they planned to fix the Schaeffer Cox problem by going into his home to take out his kid, then just shoot Schaeffer in the process. The military police gave Schaeffer Cox's attorney affidavits to this effect and would later testify to the same under oath. At the FBI Special Agent Klein's direction, Fulton made a third attempt to get Schaeffer to do a mass shooting. Fulton did this by issuing a death threat ultimatum and promised to kill Schaeffer himself if he refused the proposal violence again. Fearing for their lives, the Cox family packed up and headed for Canada. But the BFBI sent another undercover provocateur, R.G. Olson, after them, court documents say. Olson, a self-described drug wholesaler working under the supervision of FBI Special Agent Richard Sutherland, held the whole Cox family, including a 2-year-old boy and a 3-week-old baby girl, hostage against their will in an attic for 21 days after sabotaging their vehicle, then using death threats from Fulton, and made up a story about a truck driver to keep them from leaving. The government does not dispute the fact that the actions of the provocateurs working under the FBI's supervisor did, in fact, meet the legal definition of first-degree kidnapping, say John Robert, the Fairbanks attorney who got all state charges against Cox thrown out. On March 10, 2011, Schaeffer Cox was taken from the attic to a deserted industrial lot in Fairbanks where he believed he would meet the truck driver Olson had promised. No such truck driver existed. Instead, there was an FBI ambush of out-of-town agents who did not know Schaeffer Cox was a well-respected local political voice with popular support. The agents who had been instructed to shoot Schaeffer on sight if he had a weapon were not advised by the local FBI case agent of Cox's repeated statements about being like Gandhi and not Rambo. FBI Special Agent Richard Sutherland supplied Olson with an unregistered, non-traceable pistol and instructed him to put it in Schaeffer's lap, then get under the truck so there will be some thick metal between you and him when the shooting starts. The FBI's plan was interrupted when the owner of the industrial lot happened upon the scene and started asking questions about why men with masks and machine guns were hiding around the corner. Schaeffer Cox was arrested and put on trial for conspiracy against the government. The prosecution was led by Steve Scrocky and Joseph Bottini, the same people that were held in contempt of court for hiding evidence in several related trials of Alaska political personalities. The audio recording of Schaeffer Cox repeatedly rejecting violence were hidden from the jury but are now being made available to the public by Schaeffer Cox supporters via YouTube and other means. Steve Scrocky, who has publicly attacked Schaeffer for his belief in moral higher law, built his case primarily on the testimony of Fulton and Olson, but recently released audio recordings and emails between Scrocky and his boss, U.S. Attorney Karen Loeffler, now show that Scrocky coached his witnesses to lie, then vouched for those lies in his closing arguments to the jury. Still, others have taken issue with Scrocky's entire theory of the case. The importance of this case is significant to the whole of humanity, says Larry Pratt, president of Gun Owners of America. He points out that the prosecution conceded that Cox had no actual plans for violence, but convicted him anyway based on Cox's belief that we, the people, may someday have to stand down an out-of-control government. Schaeffer Cox has been in prison since 2011, agrees. If we don't reverse my conviction, it will set a sweeping new precedent allowing for the wholesale roundup of those who have not committed any crimes. Please access the links in the description box below for more information on Schaeffer Cox. There is also a link to a White House petition to free this man. Thank you.